This is session 5 on the OWASP top 10. So we'll do a little bit of an introduction. We'll look at things you can do to combat security misconfiguration, and then chatsploit. So chatsploit, because you haven't been to the other sessions, I developed an application that has a whole bunch of security holes in it. So if you go and you look at the first session, we'll do show a live active exploit of SQL injection. We go to another session, we'll show you like cross-site scripting. All of that, chatsploit has a whole bunch of problems inside it. So we do a live exploit, and then we fix it during the session. So you can see both what the problem is and then how to mitigate. So OWASP is application security. So security is a big space, right? There's a whole bunch of different areas inside it. So so you mentioned you were on networking, so maybe you do like network security, firewalls, and that kind of thing. That's right. Database security is I do a bunch of like, when I did this work, was vulnerability assessments and activity logging for databases. Another specialist area. You have guys who do log analysis at the application layer. But application security is okay. So if you're an application developer, if you're a software developer, how do you make sure that the application that you're building is secure? How do you follow all those best practices? And so this is the 5th one of the OWASP top 10 security misconfiguration. We've already done a session on insecure design. So in insecure design, we looked at chatsploit and how it was much less secure than others in the chat area. It's a chat application. So we looked at Signal. Signal is known as a highly secure chat application. So we compared the designs to each other. For number 3, we looked at injection and showed that for cryptographic failures, we looked at HTTPS, how that's configured, and other problems related. And then broken access control, we looked at some problematic access controls within chatsploit that allowed users to see other users' chats if they modified their URLs appropriately. And so number 5, we're going to talk about security is misconfiguration. So again, if you want to see those other sessions, they're all on YouTube. Lauren's been great and has posted all of those. So the application is more than code, right? There's lots of layers to it. One of those layers is all the supporting infrastructure, or what they used to call like middleware, for the app. So if you have we're going to show like a separate HTTP server, separate from the application, the proxies, the requests between the browser and the actual application. There's a lot of reasons you might want to put in an HTTP server. So the security of that HTTP server is an important part of your overall application security. Similar, you have a database that's backing the application. The security of the database itself is also important, right? So you don't want to do things like expose that database to the internet and then have default usernames and passwords for that database. And so, because that'll be easily compromised. And so this is all about the things around the application that could have security implications. So one that's more prevalent nowadays is cloud infrastructure. So if you're using maybe AWS S3, for example, common one is it's very easy. Well, they made it harder in recent years, but it's very easy to publicly expose any resources you have in AWS S3 to the general internet. And have them being able to be seen. So good. So this is all about all of these things. If you have them to support your application, are they securely configured? These things tend to be very complicated. They're in a good way, right? They offer a lot of functionality to assist your application, but because they offer a whole set of functionality, they can also create security issues. So how do you combat it? Well, one is hardening. So there's this is the process of taking your application and application middleware and removing all the extraneous stuff so that only what you need is running. That's like attack surface management. So if you have a whole bunch of, if you, Apache HTTP, for example, if you deploy that as a web server, there's a whole bunch of plugins associated with it. You only use the plugins that you absolutely need, because every additional plugin has potential security holes. So you only install what's necessary, and then you do automatic benchmarking. So there's a whole bunch of products on the market, things like Nexpose and other vulnerability assessment work. The one I work with is Guardian for database security benchmarking. So you can set this up so it goes and scans the configuration of your middleware on a regular basis and says, oh, okay, so these are the things that you're doing that are against that baseline, against those security best practices, and here's how you can mitigate it. So that's what the automatic benchmarking is about. So we're going to look at Chatsploit. Like I mentioned, Chatsploit is the application that's full of security holes that we have that you access inside infosec to sort of demonstrate security problems. So Chatsploit is a Node application. So Node is a popular application server for JavaScript. But we have a HTTP server and proxy, Nginx, in front of it. To access Chatsploit, you go through Nginx via your browser. So the HTTP calls go from your browser to this middleware to Node. And I'm going to show you some poorly configured Nginx configuration. It's amazing how it's jumping there. I do not see that on my screen at all. Okay. So there's okay. So we'll go look at that. So here's Chatsploit. It's running on my local host. You can go and chat with people. That's what this chat thing is here. Also, you can go and find friends after you log in. So I talk a little bit more about what this functionality is in the other sessions. So you can go and see how it works. So, yeah, all right. So I have very poor passwords on this application, again, because everything's poorly configured. It's kind of nice. Chrome tells you, hey, you have a very bad password. So they compare that. In the previous session, we actually had a section where we talked about password management. All right, great. Thanks for joining. All right, so we you can go and find friends. I mean, the find friends area is where we found our SQL injection vulnerability in our first ones. But you can go and sort of find friends. That's just how the application works. But the important thing for this session is there are these images, right? These images that are hosted in the application. And normally when you have image hosting like this, it's done through the web server, not the application server. So it's done by Nginx rather than your actual application. So if we go here and we inspect this, and we go and see where these resources are located. All right, so we go in here. All right. Okay, we've got two images here. We got one at localhost chatsploit2 static WASP. All right, so let's take that image. All right, so now we're looking at the image right inside our browser. Okay, and let's just play around with this URL. So let's take out WASP. And okay, all right. So now we have an index here. So someone is there's actually no need to have these index pages. So like an old school internet thing that HTTP servers used to support, and no one really uses anymore. But you can turn these features on. So Chatsploit has this feature on. It doesn't need it. Anyway, so there's the static page. I wonder if I just take out static, what happens? Oh, all right. There's a whole bunch of other stuff here. Oh, and okay, one of them is the database. So Chatsploit DB, this is the SQLite database. So you can just go and download that. And there you go. Now you can open this with SQLite and go and see everyone's messages to each other. Kind of a contrived example, but the same kind of thing applies, right? So there's things you can expose the you can expose resources on the you can expose files via the HTTP server, which we did. We did it poorly, and so now they can go and download files they really shouldn't. So there's actually a few themes here. One could argue that this is actually a broken access control problem. And the thing about these specific categories is that they heavily overlap. So just watch out for that. They do have, there's something called the common, actually, let's go look at it. So OWASP top 10. If you go and look at the OWASP Foundation, here's the OWASP top 10. You can go and look at, yeah, see, this is the thing I showed you before. But if you go and you want to see the formal definition of security misconfiguration, you can see here. It's over here. And then there's a list of mapped CWEs in this area here. So CWEs is the common weaknesses and exposures. It was developed after the CVEs. Does anyone know what a CVE is? What's that?
That's a database of vulnerability and exploits.
Yeah, that's right.
Common vulnerability and exploits.
That's right. So if you have a problem with your application, like there's a specific vulnerability in the application you've developed and it's public, what happens is someone will contact you and say, I found a vulnerability. Hopefully they do it in a responsible way, right? That's responsible disclosure. You say, okay, so that's a vulnerability. I have to tell my users. The way you tell your users is via the CVEs, it's databases of software vulnerabilities. The CWEs were built after that, which is like a taxonomy of common things that go wrong with applications. So the CWEs sort of group the CVEs. Anyway, so like a little bit of a digression, but the point there is they heavily overlap these particular areas. So this is broken access control via security misconfiguration. Good. All right. So that's it. So now let's go fix this, right? So we have this is my application server running here. It would be running as a daemon in real life, but I just got it running here. This is my Node application. It's running on port, this is up here somewhere, port 3000. And then I have Nginx, right? We have Nginx running on port 80. That's its default. And we have a proxy pass location here. So if you go to / we say, okay, proxy to localhost 3000, right? So this is proxying to the web application. And but if you go to Chatsploit, if you go to /chatsploit instead, expose home John Haldenman personal project, right? Slash chatsploit2. So there's actually a really easy way to prevent this from occurring you can see it's pretty easy to misconfigure. So all you do is static. And so this will expose home John Haldenman personal project chatsploit static at chatsploit2 static. So that's just the Nginx thing. And so we'll restart Nginx now. All right. And then we'll refresh this page. And now we get a 404. That's what we want, right? And but does the application break? No, you guys still go back to static. There we go. So the specific images are there still. We go to back to here where it's proxying through Nginx. Refresh this. There you go. So there you go. So that's a middleware misconfiguration causing issues with the application security as a whole. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how you sort of operationalize this, right? So you can't know everything about every single middleware product. So what do you do? Any questions?
I actually do.
Yeah.
With the index, did you actually change the location of where it's to look for? Like that's what you did.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So what we did here, what it does here is it says, okay, so expose. So this is the folder exposes, and then here's chatsploit2. So and then inside that folder, these specific ones. So 1.txt, wasp.png, and wasp.png, and wasp2.png. So it exposed it like that. We just made it more specific. We said, okay, so don't expose all of chatsploit2, just expose chatsploit2 static.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit of difference. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, all right. So you can't know everything. So what do? Well, you consult people that do know more than you. That's one way of doing it. So there's this is what benchmarking is. So there's a series of Nginx benchmarks. Some of them will be provided by the development organization itself. So the people that develop Nginx would or the piece of middleware would build a set of security best practice documents. And then you can read those documents and compare your configuration to their configuration. Didn't see that for Nginx, but there are a bunch of third-party ones. One third party is the Center for Internet Security. They have a bunch of benchmarks. If you're doing, so this is non-commercial use, right? So we're just learning together. The Center for Internet Security can provide you these benchmarks for non-commercial use for free. So if you want to educate yourself, you can go and look at any of their benchmarks. They have benchmarks for lots of different things, not everything, but a lot of different things, Nginx, but also like a whole bunch of databases. So if you pay them also a license, you can put this in a product. If you wanted to build a vulnerability assessment product, and you compare people's configuration to that benchmark. So see, that's what the product I work on does for databases. CIS has a bunch of benchmarks for like DB2 and Oracle and SQL Server. And so we do that as one of the things in the product I work with. So yeah, this is the Nginx benchmark. You can go and it tells you a little bit about it. And then there's like specific benchmark things you can test, right? So ensure only required modules are installed, right? So Nginx comes with a whole bunch of modules out of the box. These modules are not always needed. So it's kind of the hardening thing we're talking about. Minimize the features and functionality built into Nginx. And how, okay, so there's an audit here. Audit is, so how do you know? How do you know what's installed? So you can run this. I don't think I actually have Nginx in my path. I don't think this will work for me. Oh, it does. All right. never mind. So I prepare for these things really hard. So anyways, there's a whole bunch of features added here. If we didn't need like HTTP gzip static modules, there's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities around gzip handling, right? So like use after freeze and that kind of thing. And so if you remove that module, then there's a class of vulnerabilities that you're not exposed to. And so that's what it's basically saying here. There's a whole bunch of more. So that one's like a manual one. You have to compare what you use to what's installed. So that's a harder one. Some of them are easier, like, see if we can find one that relates to ours. gzip static module. Okay, all right. So ensure auto index is disabled. So auto index processes requests ending in the / character. This feature enables directory listing, which can be useful for attacker reconnaissance. So it should be disabled. So if you remember, when we had the misconfigured chatsploit, it showed us this directory entry. We'd have to have an additional piece of information to download the chatsploit database, and that is that it would be there and it'd be called chatsploit.db in order to download it. But we had this listing. So is there a way we can serve the files but not have the listing? And that's what this says, is you turn the listing off. So there's an audit here. So let's run this and see what happens. Oops. Oh, all right. It returns something. So my configuration file has, all this does is creps the index.conf file for something that says auto index. So I have this enabled. Okay, all right. So then you go and you see, search the configuration files and find the, okay, and then set the value of all indirect auto index directives to off, or remove those directives. Okay, so let's go. This is the file. So we go sudo vi that. Okay, we'll just edit anyway. All right. And oh, here it is, auto index on, right? So it's saying turn it off. All right, so do that. All right, so we're going to sudo service nginx. Yeah. In here somewhere. All right, good. All right. So now if we go here and we refresh this, that's OWASP forbidden. Still 404 here. Okay, that's fine. And I think if you go / no, it's still 404. Anyway, anyways, 403 for beginning, but we should still be able to see wasp.png. Okay, so it's still there. It's still serving the files, but it's not telling someone that goes to the directory above it. Is it too hard? Can you guys actually see that? I just noticed now that this is hard to see. Yeah. All right. Is that better? Yes. Sorry. Oh man. All right. Hopefully it was easy to see. But speak up if you guys had trouble. So yeah, we removed the directory listing. It used to be here at the static area. Now it is gone because we turned off that feature. But we can still, we can still get the file if we know the name. And that means the website doesn't break, but we still see the files here. So that is how that all works. Okay, so that's benchmarking. So benchmark. So what you could do is you can now go and build a product that goes and does the benchmarks automatically, or you can go sell consulting services using the CIS benchmark. Anyway, that's what some people do. This process is called vulnerability assessments. This plus checking if your software is up to date would be vulnerability assessments. Okay, so That is the Center for Internet Security benchmark. So we talked about hardening. And so, okay, yeah, we already talked about all that. So that is that. That's all I have for security misconfiguration. It's only 1/2 this was the shortest OWASP one we have. But hopefully you found it interesting. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What would be your preference from an automation perspective for tools when it comes to like the old OWASP test?
Oh yeah. So there's a lot. I don't really have a preference. They all seem to be about the same, and they all like they all use the same benchmarks. So one is like CIS is one, right? Center for Internet Security. Another one is STIG. So STIG is the Security Technical Implementation Guides. From the United States Department of Defense. So the STIGs are like their benchmarks for making sure military installations are secure. So they're pretty good. If it's new, the problem with these benchmarks though is it tends to be like old school software, stuff that's been around forever. Like the government has to buy it, particularly the STIGs, right?
Sorry, just when you're finished that thought, I have another question.
Okay, good. So when the military has to approve and procure a piece of software before they're able to STIG for it, and so that tends to mean that like established players will have STIGs and others will not. So you're not going to see brand new database types. I don't know, like ClickHouse, right? On the I doubt there's a STIG for ClickHouse, but there would be one for Oracle. They bought Oracle a long time ago. Anyway, that's the one disadvantage. And then there's other benchmarks by if it's those new products, hopefully they have information that they publish on how to harden. You can't get in a situation though, and it's a disadvantage of using bleeding edge technology where there is no benchmark. And you just have to use general common sense and principles like those things, like disabling all the features you're not using, for example, in your and build your own benchmarks. But yeah, a lot of the products do very similar stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
So next question, how do you, so you kind of talked about the risk versus reward aspect of things, and obviously, how do you weigh that yourself when you're using these kind of tools? Do you find CIS benchmarks to be like a little too high for a benchmark perspective versus, let's say, NIST or something like that?
Oh yeah, okay. And this is another good one. Although I don't know if they have specific software benchmarks. Maybe. But we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about CVEs.
Okay.
CVEs in particular, where you can get into a situation where you do stuff just to get rid of the CVE, even though there's no way you're affected by it. And there's a lot of incentives in the industry to, especially around if you're in like consulting and that kind of thing, to get CVEs under your name. And so they will, in order to try and get a CVE, you might get a whole bunch of like false reports, effectively spam reports. And that kind of thing. So we'll talk a little bit about that with CVEs. I don't really see it in benchmarking as much. This tends to work. You just have to, so there's in general with security, there's a compliance aspect to things. And so if you're working in an industry that's heavily regulated, you might have a specific, like the Department of Defense, you might have specific benchmarks that you have to meet, and sometimes you have to do dumb things in order to meet the benchmarks, but you do it It doesn't, nothing that would reduce your security posture, but stuff that's just like kind of a waste of time. If you're not in a highly regulated industry, you can kind of skip that stuff and just do the stuff that makes sense. I don't know if the strictness is somewhat of a concern. Like there's a lot in here, right? But I think particularly with like the cloud stuff too, there's a lot of knobs to turn. It's probably worth having some time devoted to hardening inside your project. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but put a box around it because you can go crazy.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I just want to ask some questions to get some questions going. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you guys have time.
Yeah. Any others?
Sorry. What is some of the hardest vulnerabilities that you've had to take care of, and have you had to deal with a 0 day, and how did you deal with that? Sorry, this sounds like more like an interview, but
Yeah.
I want to get that kind of like from an OWASP perspective. Application security has been like on a predominant like train to like nowhere, I guess. And I say that only because I see the containerization of like everything, and the more containers that I see, there's less security that goes into those containers.
Yeah.
And you go to this cloud aspect, and how do you tell a programmer, developer, database guy that this sucks? Like, I guess, and me.
How do you convince them?
And yeah, so like, is there a process that you go through to kind of like, okay, this CVE is a 9, right? Let's go deal with that.
Yeah.
But we also have the CVE is a 4 that will lead to that 9. Can we deal with that, right? Like, so. And I'm just wondering how you process that, and I would love to have a big discussion around people's thought process on dealing with these kind of things.
Yeah, no, we do. So for like CVEs, we do a lot of. So we have mandates from our CISO to patch any CVEs within a month, and actually it doesn't matter the severity. There's an exception process, and the exceptions primarily go around like dependencies of dependencies. So if you have a dependency and they use something that has a vulnerability, but they haven't updated their software yet, there's some things that we have to make sure that we're on a level of their software that is supported, and that they'll pick it up eventually, but that delays us a lot, right? So like the entire the chain of vulnerabilities to the end issue, that's very difficult to actually patch.
Now that brings me to that idea, like, so then you have an open source library that you're using in your.
Oh yeah,
so how do you manage that? Like, do you like open SSL, all of a sudden it's like boom, you got Heartbleed.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that from what we're talking about, like an OWASP perspective? Sorry.
Yeah. So when Heartbleed came out, there was widespread panic. So you just do there's and other one was just happened over Christmas last year. I don't remember it now.
Oh my God, yeah, there's been a lot.
Yeah, but you just have to patch as fast as you can. And then if you're a downstream consumer and you use all those other packages, try and find a way to mitigate. So I know a lot of customers for like Heartbleed did some stuff on WAFs, like web application firewalls, and then mitigate that way. And so hopefully you have some. That's definitely not the best solution. I don't particularly like WAFs, but in that particular instance, they were really useful because it was so bad and so
prevalent.
Yeah, and it's like so everywhere. It's impossible to. So Heartbleed. Does anyone, you guys know what Heartbleed was? Okay, so it was you could send a message to to a web server that was serving HTTPS, and then it would a specially crafted message, and then it would dump portions of its memory back to you. It echo that. And so there's a whole bunch of things inside web server memory that are secrets. Things like session keys, like private keys and just certificates and all that kind of thing. And so it's really bad just dumping memory back to you. And so so what we're talking about, so that was a problem in OpenSSL, which is used a huge amount of software. And so yeah, it was just industry panic to try and patch OpenSSL as fast as possible, but also put things in front of the web applications to clean those specially crafted messages so that you weren't exposed while you're trying to fix all that. Kind of nice being, so I used to manage infrastructure for database security, it's logging infrastructure. So you have these devices that will parse network packets coming in from your database servers. So there's agents that replicate the client server communication stream, and they go to these devices. And so my job up until 2 years ago was managing those security devices. And so if anything like that happened, then your weekend shot, and you're working late nights and that kind of thing, trying to get these things patched. Now I just deliver software. It's actually, which is a lot easier. I mean, it's still it's just one thing I patch. That's the code base.
Okay.
And so that's kind of nice. But I do feel for the long-suffering security administrator.
It's absolutely
It's a tough job.
It is. And I'll just kind of sorry, I just did add to what you said. So anybody from the cybersecurity perspective, I just want to, there's lots of jobs out there. So please follow this up. It's amazing. There's so much opportunity out there. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I digress.
No, it's good. Any other questions? Okay. What do we think of the session? Would you change anything for the next one? Is that good? Happy? With your time coming down here? Okay, good. All right. Take a look at the other four. They're actually more, there's kind of exciting stuff back here. SQL injection, again, my favorite. That's just because it's my area. Yeah. So go back, look at those ones if this was fun to you. And come next month. We do one of these a month. So we'll do vulnerability and outdated components. We talked a little about CVEs in this session, but we'll go in depth into what CVEs are. And people make their careers on CVEs, and so there's a lot to talk about in that area. And so it'll be a lot of fun. So come next month.